Okay, Per Bylund, we are on the air. You're in Baylor, Texas now, teaching at the university.
I do research at the university, so I'm
Okay,
not actually teaching
okay, but in the economics department.
in the entrepreneurship department.
Oh, fun. Okay,
But I mean,
that's
an economist in the entrepreneurship department, so it makes sense.
okay. And you've been writing some really great stuff for Liberty.me. With like a razor sharp focus on economic theory, which has been really interesting.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I think there is a shortage in the market for ideas, if you like, of someone actually using structured, just logical thinking, trying to dissect all this buzz out there. But there are a lot of opinions, and usually they're very unfounded. So I saw Liberty.me as an opportunity to actually get some of the thinking skills out there. And I'm not saying I'm perfect or anything, but economics is a very powerful tool for just thinking.
Yeah, and it's especially powerful when you've had a lot of experience in sort of introducing people to economics. When people first start thinking about economics, it can be, a challenge, a real sort of a moment of enlightenment, don't you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the economic way of thinking, for some reason, it is sort of a surprise to people that you can actually think in this way. And it really shouldn't be, but I guess we're all brainwashed from the day we're born into just accepting the opinion of authorities or just thinking that, yeah, whatever I see is normal, so that's the way it should be, even if it doesn't make any sense. Because economics, I mean, the basic concept is opportunity cost. It's just everything is a trade-off. Every benefit has a cost. You give up something to get something else. And that's basically what we teach in Econ 101, but it's news to all the students. They're all very confused. And I taught at the University of Missouri before, and these principles courses, after every lecture, half of the class come up to the professor and ask, I don't really get this. What is going on here? And how do we think about this? Because it's all news to them that actually there is a trade-off for everything you do.
How do you get them to understand it best? It's usually examples from their own lives, like you're sitting in this classroom rather than at home gaming, that sort of example.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, college education is it's a lot of games and play, and professors are more entertainers than they're actually uh, communicating knowledge, which is a big problem. Um, but yeah, you use examples from their lives, and if they have computers in front of them, you ask them why they chose that computer and not another one, and then you use another student and ask why they chose differently, and then you start talking about how values are subjective and how they both made sacrifices in order to make that choice, and they actually consider those sacrifices to be less worth than the choice they made, obviously. But it's not obvious to them until you actually tell them.
Yeah, and apparently it's not obvious at all to politicians who and central planners who just imagine that you can create wealth out of legislation, for example.
Well, I think that is because no one really knows where wealth comes from. When
Yeah.
everybody thinks, well, everything was here on planet Earth before, so everything we've done is really just reconfigured it and moved things around a little bit. But the the amount of wealth that we have today is the same as we had before. I've actually had socialists tell me that we are as rich today as a population, a world population, as we were in the Stone Age. The difference is that we have extracted wealth from Africa, and that's why we are so rich in the West. But it doesn't make any sense, of course, because people in Africa are not as poor as in the Stone Age, and we are, of course, a lot richer. So something has happened, but people don't really realize that we create wealth because we value things in different ways.
This is one of the reasons I think it's so valuable for people to look at the highly sophisticated vital statistics and demographic data that have been assembled over the last 30 or 40 years that kind of conjecturalize history all the way back to the ancient world and plot economic growth and income and lifespans and all these things. It's such a shock to see history put in, small graphs like that, and you see what an astonishing difference capitalism made in the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I made the mistake of using the Soviet Union as an example in one of my classes when I taught, and it occurred to me that all the students were born after the collapse of the Soviet Union, so they really had no clue what I was talking about. But I mean, when I grew up in Sweden, there was one TV channel. There was one state television channel. It was black and white, and then after a few years, we actually got a second one. But that's all we had in terms of television. Now we watch television on our cell phones while we're riding in bus.
Yeah, the memory of the Soviet Union and its collapse belongs only to an older generation. It's kind of sad in a way, but we still do have examples in the world, North Korea and Cuba, of course, of examples of worlds that have been destroyed by governments and their collectivization of property, or at least attempted collectivization of property. Actually, just wholesale looting, basically.
Yeah, but I mean, we have to give them a little credit too. I mean, they're much more equal in North Korea than they are in the West.
Yeah,
they're equally starving.
Yeah, right. Yeah, which is a sort of a dream that some people have. Now, I was really intrigued by your article that you wrote the other day that really took a kind of systematic look at a subject in economics that is not often talked about, although it's kind of a predominant in all theorizing, and it's called in ecclesiastical Latin you would pronounce it, Ceteris Paribus, but I guess in more commonly it's just called Ceteris Paribus, right? This is the dominant assumption in economics that you described as being pretty essential to how to think like an economist. Can you explain it?
Well, I would say it's actually how to think at all in a structured manner. I mean, the only way we can make sense of the world, since everything is in constant flux, is to keep certain things that we consider irrelevant to what we want to study, keep them the same, and then think what happens if we actually change this variable or these variables. What effect is this going to have on the rest of the world? And how are these interdependent with everything that they are, basically the context in which these are changing? What is the interdependence? Most variables are mutually constituting, as we would say in academia, which means they all affect each other, right? So we can't really think of changing one variable and then how everything changes at once. That's impossible. So what you have to do is think of one variable or a couple of variables that we think are interesting and change them and keep everything else out of the picture. That's the only way we can make sense of it at all. That's the only way we can structure thinking and actually go through the process step by step and figure out what is going on.
Is this a logical exercise or a statistical one?
Well, this is a logical exercise. It has to be. I mean, statistically, I guess you could keep things separate, but I have a big problem with using data at all. I mean, we say that anecdotal evidence is not evidence at all, but well, data is a bunch of anecdotes. And using a bunch of anecdotes doesn't make it a lot better, right? I mean, even empirical sciences, natural sciences, when they're using data has to first be selected. Then they have to be interpreted before they're put into the database. And then we can run statistical magic on those numbers and let the software spit out some sort of significant outcome. But it's still based on our selection of what parameters are useful and which ones could actually explain these things. And then we interpret them and put them into a database as ones or zeros or whatever. So, of course, there are huge problems to this.
Can you give an example of then how ceteris paribus assumptions would work in a purely logical case? Maybe a very conventional sort of argument or concerning, for example, the minimum wage.
Well, sure. I mean, then we start by having a mental image of what the market looks like and all these sort of things. So we start with a free market where most all trades and exchanges that are profitable are actually being made. And then we have certain assumptions about what this looks like. And then, of course, if someone forces the minimum wage up to a higher than would be the natural level, of course it means that those who were able to produce at the wage they had before will not be able to produce at the higher level. So what happens then? Well, then we walk through the example and say, well, okay, so if John makes $12 an hour and he produces $12.50 of value, and someone says that no, John should have $13. Well, why would anyone hire John? Hiring John means 50 cents charity every hour because you have to give him more than he's actually worth. It's pretty obvious that the minimum wage prohibits low-wage work. Obviously, that causes unemployment. There are other things going on too. So if we walk through the example a little more, then we see what would an employer do? Because one argument against this is that some of these tasks have to be carried out anyway. Just pushing John out of the business firm doesn't mean that some of the things that John was making or doing, that they don't have to be done anymore. Well, what happens then? Well, some of those people working there will have to do more in order to earn their wage. Maybe we can keep one John instead of 3 Johns and let him work harder. Or we invest in machinery that makes labor more productive. Or we hire another firm to do the stuff that are experts. Or whatever happens, right? So we can walk through this example and see that these things actually have ripple effects. These little regulations in the marketplace have ripple effects that changes relative prices and how things are done throughout the marketplace. So the whole market is really distorted with every single law that changes it.
And the only way you can really discover this is by that initial assumption. Like, let's look at what happens to the individual worker, under the following conditions of wage control, basically, is what it is, and holding everything else equal. And that's what Ceteris Paribus means. It means to just freeze everything else in place and examine this one effect.
Exactly. So in the case of John, I mean, we looked at this is what it's like right now. And if we only change this thing, which is the wage of John, but nothing else, he still produces as productively as before. Everybody else does what they do. All the other firms do what they do. The firm keeps all its suppliers and all its customers and all these things. Those are held equal. What happens to John? Of course, this is the big problem now in the discussion with all the progressives calling for raising the minimum wage by 40% something. And what they're saying is really that, well, we don't really know if it's going to cause unemployment. Well, what they're doing then is really comparing the number of jobs today with the number of jobs after we increase the minimum wage. But those are like comparing apples and oranges. Those are not the same things. Those may not be the same jobs. Those are just statistics, right? So we don't know how many jobs there would be in 2016 or whatever it is. And that's what we should compare it with. So if we enforce the minimum wage and it makes the number of jobs in the market be X in 2016, we have to compare it with what the number of jobs would be at the same time without the minimum wage law. Not comparing it with how many jobs are there today. Because a lot of things happen between now and then.
Right. And there's a lot of effects. So it's a big world with a lot of stuff going on, right? This is why...
Imagine that suddenly some new production technology is innovated, and suddenly we can all buy 1 billion flying cars between now and 2016. Well, that's going to change everything. So then comparing the statistics of how many people are employed by General Motors today and how many people are employed by General Motors in 2016 with a minimum wage increase in between. Well, we also had this new flying car thing happen. This is not part of the sort of prediction that the Congressional Budget Office or whoever is doing this. That's not part of that. They cannot know that. And this is a big thing, but there are plenty of small things going on every day. Entrepreneurs make innovations every freaking day. That changes the marketplace.
Is this why the empirical literature on minimum wage can be so contentious? Because you just look at the literature and it seems overwhelmingly obvious that the minimum wage is damaging, and yet every once in a while you'll get some very tricky, combination of factors that seem to create an illusory sense of cause and effect, in which employment, goes up or wages increase after a minimum wage.
Right. I mean, it may not be a problem. Some of these liberal professors in economics who are actually for increasing the minimum wage, they're saying that partly that, yes, the natural wage for these people is really higher, but it's held down for other reasons, whatever it is. And people are not investing in capital to raise the productivity of labor in the rate they should be for whatever reason, things like that. And they're expecting economic growth at a certain rate over these years, which will cause a number of more jobs. So considering all these other things that will happen anyway, it may be the case that everybody gets to keep their job. Or at least that they can't say that, of course, but they can say that the number of jobs will not decrease over this time. But what they're really saying is that the number of jobs would have increased over this time. But with the minimum wage law, it will not, at least not decrease.
I saw one argument recently where it was pretty convoluted, and I addressed it in a piece, but the idea that the minimum wage actually makes jobs stickier, so that workers are, after minimum wages go into place, are more secure in their employment, which I didn't even know how to address whether or not that's true, but it didn't seem obvious to me that that was actually a good thing. I mean, if people feel, if they're clinging to their jobs, like a like a life raft or something like that, for fear of throwing themselves into the market, that kind of job lock is actually not good for workers. But I could imagine how a minimum wage would actually cause that.
Well, of course, it would make it more sticky in the sense that there will be fewer jobs than there otherwise would have been.
Right.
So of course, people will cling on to whatever job they have. I mean, flipping burgers is suddenly a really, really fun and good thing, because the other alternative you have is unemployment.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, of course, it's going to be more sticky. That's obvious. But it's also unemployment is also going to be more sticky. It's not going to be a class issue. It's going to be a caste issue, right? Yeah. So you're going to have sticky unemployment, and that's not what they're talking about, right? That's not what they want to mention. Yeah. They want to pretend like that doesn't happen.
Yeah. I wondered about this because the New York Times is editorializing about this, and proclaiming what seemed to me a problem as an actual, instead of being a bug, as actually a feature, for them. But the people go to such lengths to defend what seems very obvious, as you said. We're using the Ceteris Paribus, sort of assumptions about wages and employment, that it's just incontrovertibly true that minimum wage makes life more difficult for underskilled employees, for people who can't produce at the level that the minimum wage is mandating. I mean, this seems like that's not even worth debating. And so it must be very frustrating in a way for you to constantly have to argue this point.
Yeah, it is. And I think one of the things that is really problematic is all these progressive economists who realize the problem, but they're still making the argument, and they're not making they're not doing the mistake of not using Ceteris Paribus arguments. They're making another mistake. So what they're saying is that, yeah, this is going to cause the market to have fewer jobs. We might even get unemployment. I mean, even the Congressional Budget Office said that we would get 500,000 fewer jobs because of this. But these economists, they say it's worth it. And why is it worth it? Because those jobs that are still there, they would make so much more money, because we jack up the minimum wage by 40%, that we can afford to have this unemployment. Because so many people will be forcefully, sure, but raised out of poverty, and they will pay taxes. They will have all these opportunities to finance whatever it is, college or whatever for their kids. And since they make this much more money, we have more tax money, which means we can jack up unemployment benefits for those who lose their jobs. Obviously, now we're we're doing interpersonal utility comparisons, which is something we also teach in the first year, that you can't do that. You can't say that $5 more for John is a lot better than $4 less for someone else. You can't do that. But they do this with millions of people. That's suddenly not a problem.
Yeah, this is a kind of a strange. My first thought as you were describing that is that it just sounds like the state moving people around, in a big game, an attempt to kind of centrally plan the world and manage people as if they're just pawns, really.
Well, it's the danger of using statistics, right? We talked about before that, yeah, we're not going to lose jobs, not net number of jobs anyway, between now and then. Well, we don't know who are actually going to keep their jobs or who are going to get the new jobs that are created. So the same people are not going to have jobs, but the number of jobs is going to be the same. And that's all that matters to politicians, because they only have the statistics. They have no clue what that actually means in people's lives. And that's what they're doing here, too. They're comparing, well, so many millions are making this much more money, and only these millions are making so much less money, but they get unemployment benefits instead. And, well, if we just add it up, then we're going to get more money. And that's a good thing. Yeah. Obviously, it's not, because suddenly we have, 10 million people who are forced to be unemployed for the rest of their lives because of this law.
What's another area that you think Ceteris Paribus assumptions are important in? I guess all aspects of price controls, right? But you've even examined the case of, I saw another article on Liberty.me when you actually went into the subject of inflation.
Right, and I mean that is basically the same thing. If you just created a lot more money, then following the logic, using the Ceteris Paribus, that nothing else changes, but there's more money, well, then you have what we call Kantian effects, because the money's going to end up somewhere. It's not going to be like helicopter Ben Bernanke just pushing out money from his helicopter and everybody's going to get another $100. That's not what's going to happen. What's going to happen is that this money is going to flow out through the banking system via credit to some industry that suddenly entrepreneurs feel that, oh, wow, with all this new money, the lower interest rates, we're going to be able to invest more. Maybe there's a reason for them to think that this is more profitable than other industries or whatever it is. But this industry is going to get this money. The other ones are not. And then we can follow these ripple effects as the money hits all these industries one after the other and changes prices as it goes. And those are the Kantian effects, where those people who first get the money, they will get rich because they can use this new money and buy stuff at old prices before the prices increase. But those who get the money last, they're going to be the suckers because they have to buy the goods at the new higher prices with only their old money.
This sounds like it fits very well with what happened after 2008. Many people expected a kind of a general rise in prices of everything, but history turned out very differently. The money really stayed very strongly within the sort of shadow banking system and increased asset prices. So you've got a lot of buying low and a lot of profitability on the upside with the increase of asset prices all the way around, and securities and a bond bubble and everything else. But the story is played out a little differently than one might have expected it to in the past under different institutional circumstances, don't you think?
Yeah, I think so. And it's really impossible to predict exactly what's going to happen. You don't even know. When you put all this money into the hands of the banks, you don't know what they're going to do with them. I mean, right. One of the first problems, at least in the public debate, when we started with this quantitative easing, was that the banks held on to the money, and they made money off the money rather than actually just pushing it out there.
Right.
Well, there weren't businesses willing to take this new money because they saw that, well, times are harsh, there's a lot of regime uncertainty and all these other things going on, so we don't want to invest. Well, that's one thing. So the banks had to keep the money. And another argument was that, well, they they had a lot of holes to fill. And it was actually better to just push the money into Wall Street and make a little money short term than handing out loans. So it was sort of, in retrospect, it should have been expected perhaps. But you can't really predict exactly what's going to happen. So you can't know how this is going to affect anything. The only thing you know when you're pushing money into the market like this is that there are going to be a lot of distortions. Good or bad? Well, it depends on for whom.
Right. Yeah, and then there's the problem that banks don't want to lend at zero interest. I mean, that's not very profitable for them. But it was funny because I was rereading Rothbard's America's Great Depression. He describes this almost the exact same scenario, like kind of a deleveraging situation, forcible lowering of interest rates, sort of the economy awash in money, but nobody interested in taking loans or receiving loans. And seeing an explosion, in asset prices in very strange, places, but generally a kind of a deflationary push on general prices. So I was very surprised to see that Rothbard had actually explained that this was exactly what happened in like 1933 and 1934.
Well, that's the power of economic thinking.
Yeah.
And if you do it right, then you're going to actually explain what's going on, but you can't tell exactly what's going to happen.
Right.
I mean, one of the critiques of Austrian economics is that, well, we don't make predictions, and predictions in the sense that we can't tell that this or that policy is going to increase or decrease unemployment by 0.35%. Well, we can't say that because there are so many things going on. We can say that raising whatever bar, like the minimum wage, is going to cause the economy to have fewer jobs than before. How many fewer? That depends on everything else, because businesses invest in their innovations, and maybe someday people just don't want to consume anymore, or whatever it is. We can't know that. We can know that compared to what would have been, this is going to be fewer jobs. That's all we can say. Non-Austrian economists, they try to run this through databases, and they do the Ceteris Paribus like crazy, because they consider everything to be equal, and then they just let the statistics tell them that, oh, this is going to be the trend in the future. Well, there can be any sort of disruption, innovative ones through entrepreneurship, that happens in between now and then, and you can't really tell exactly what's going to happen. Preferences change, but they're held constant in the models. Products change, policies change, everything changes.
Yeah, that's the one unchanging feature of the world. Is it's just constantly moving, and constantly changing. Even under conditions of recession, over the last 5 years, we've seen some of the most astounding innovations in like the history of mankind, actually, which nobody would have expected. So. Well, Per, thank you so much for your article writing and your contributions on Liberty.me. What are you working on now? You got another one coming up?
Absolutely. I try to do one every Monday and Thursday.
Okay.
And on Monday, I was actually thinking, because I had a piece in the Wall Street Journal a few weeks back on healthcare and what happens when government regulates healthcare with experiences from Sweden. And I received a lot of, well, feedback, I guess, but a lot of them are Swedes who tell me that this is just plain wrong, because they've had a personal experience where they actually got to see a doctor, so obviously there was no wait time or something like that. The interesting thing is how they disregard completely that they are in the article. I'm actually referring to alarms and warnings from the Swedish governmental authority in charge of healthcare and controlling healthcare. So this makes no sense to me. So I was thinking of discussing what is a real argument, and why do we look at personal anecdotes and see them as having such weight, when statistics, that is a collection of anecdotes, obviously they don't have any meaning at all for us in our personal lives. And of course, that means that theory, where we don't use any of the anecdotes, it's just theory, right? it means nothing. At least in how we talk about it in everyday life, it's just theory means it's just a hypothesis. But a theory scientifically really means that that's the best freaking guess we have. We've already tested it for years, giving it everything we've got, and it still holds true. That's a theory to a scientist. So just a theory? Well, I mean, that's just saying that, well, the problem with you is that you are not God. Well, obviously not. A theory is as close as we can get as people.
Yeah. Well, good. I look forward to that article very much. I always enjoy your contributions. Thanks for spending time with me today and discussing these important topics. And it's really good to talk to you again and to see you again, Per.
You too, Jack. Absolutely.
All the best in your work.
Thanks.